Hello, my name is Lindsay Harmon. I'm the marketing manager at CollectiveSun, and we're so happy to see you here this Wednesday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. We're in San Diego, so it's still morning here. This is back to school with solar. Mascoutah School District 19 shares its solar journey. Again, thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here. The speakers that we will be having today are Matt Brennan, the CollectiveSun's VP of Sales, Tish Tablan, who's Program Director at Generation 180, Craig Fiegel, Superintendent of Schools at Mascoutah School District 19, as well as Wayne Cundy, Director of Facilities at Mascoutah School District 19. Thank you for all joining us. Just a quick agenda review. We will start off with Generation 180 speaking about solar for schools and their awesome resources and programs that they have. Then we'll be talking about who CollectiveSun is and how we can help you go solar. Then we'll have a wonderful story from Mascoutah School District 19 where they will share their solar journey and the incredible impact that their solar project has had on their community. And at the end, we will have a Q&A, which at this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A, which you should find in the webinar feature. So we will be getting to all of the questions throughout the webinar. We might be able to answer them throughout the time, but definitely we'll be hitting them at the end. So, and if we don't finish, if we're unable to hit all of the questions, we'll be following up with you with anything that you might still have questions about. So at this time, I will be turning it over to Tish at Generation 180. So
thank you, CollectiveSun, for creating this timely opportunity today to talk about solar for schools during back to school season. My name is Tish Tablan. My nonprofit organization, Generation 180, is focused on inspiring and equipping people to take action on clean energy in their homes and communities. And I lead our Solar for All Schools program, which provides resources and support for nationwide schools to go solar. So I was previously a public school teacher in both Boston and Los Angeles, and I'm also a mom of school-aged children. And today is actually their first day of school, so it's great timing. So this topic of creating a brighter future through clean energy is highly personal and important to me. Generation 180 has a vision for all school districts across the country, regardless of their size and budget and location, to be able to access the numerous benefits of clean energy. And so we have them some of them listed here on my slide. Having on-site solar technology is beneficial for students. I don't know if you can see in this photo behind me, but this technology can be used for hands-on, authentic STEM learning. And it's also great for career and technical education that prepares students for the jobs of the future. And solar PV installer is currently one of the fastest growing occupations in the country. Going solar also enhances the resilience. We'll say, yeah, we can say on this slide, thanks. Going solar also enhances the resilience of school districts. During the pandemic, schools saw budgets instantly contracted, and those with solar were more financially resilient by having lower operating costs. And the Mascoutah School District will talk more about the incredible financial savings they're already seeing. Schools with solar plus battery storage help keep schools open during power outages, and many schools also serve as emergency shelters for communities after natural disasters. So there is a whole range of benefits to both the schools and communities when they go solar. Next slide. So Mascoutah School District is the star of the show today, and I'm excited for you to hear more about their project. But I'm just going to start by spending a few minutes to paint the big picture of the movement that's happening and give you some context to how this project fits into that larger picture. So as you can see from these numbers, we have a long ways to go to reach my organization's vision of solar for all schools. These statistics come from the third edition of our report on solar schools across the country that we released last fall. And we found that at the end of 2019, there were only 5.5% of all K-12 schools, both public and private, and only 16% of public school districts that had installed a solar project of any size. Next slide. The good news is that solar adoption by schools is growing very quickly. In the 5-year period between 2014 and 2019, the amount of solar installed at K-12 schools increased by 139%. So that's more than doubling. And then the number of schools with solar grew by 81% during that same 5-year period. So we anticipate that these numbers will continue to grow, but Generation 180 is working on providing the education and resources to accelerate that adoption and to help remove the policy and funding barriers that are getting in the way. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of where around the country schools are adopting solar. So you can see California is hands down at the top of the class with more solar installed at schools than the next 5 states combined. I would give Illinois, which is the home of Mascoutah School District, an A. We ranked it 10th in the country for installed solar capacity, 3rd in the country for the number of schools with solar, and 3rd for the fastest growth in solar adoption in the last 5 years. So Mascoutah is part of the growing trend in Illinois. Next slide, please. And then we looked at our data to understand why some states are more successful than others in helping schools to go solar, and a big factor is funding. That's not surprising. Our research shows that nearly 80% of solar installed on schools is actually funded through third-party ownership, such as leases or power purchase agreements. So that means a third party, such as a solar developer, will pay for the cost of the solar energy system upfront, so the school doesn't have to take it out of their cash or take out a loan or bonds. Only 14% of solar capacity on schools is funded and owned by the schools. And Mascoutah is uniquely using both of these approaches with the help from CollectiveSun, and Matt will explain that a little more later. But it's also in a small minority of school districts that had the cash reserves to pay for the system upfront. Next slide, please. When states can lift the barrier of upfront costs for schools, we've seen solar adoption by schools explode. So in my home state of Virginia, third-party ownership was allowed in 1 utility territory in 2014. And over the past few years, we've been working to expand access to third-party ownerships to schools across the state, across utility territories, and been successful. And as a result, there has been 100-fold growth in solar at schools in just 6 years. Next slide. So since we have attendees from around the country on this webinar, I wanted to share a map that shows broadly where third-party ownership is allowed, which is the light blue color, where it is disallowed, which is the dark blue color, and where it is unclear or there's no explicit language about third-party ownership, which are the states in gray. So this map also gives you a quick visual of states where CollectiveSun may be able to offer its services, but I'll let Matt go into more detail about that next. Our goal as a nonprofit is to make solar more accessible to a diversity of communities. So with the success that we saw for schools in Virginia using third-party ownership to go solar, we're now working with partner organizations in Florida to enable access to third-party power purchase agreements solar for schools in that state. Next slide. So finally, I just wanted to share a link to our website where we have a library of resources to help schools go solar. Some of them are pictured here. We have a report that I shared you some information from. We have a step-by-step how-to guide. If you're just getting started, it walks you step-by-step what that process looks like. It includes an introduction to solar financing. Also, if you go on our site, you can see that little orange question bubble that's in the upper right corner of my slide. That will give you, if you click on that, it'll give you a chat bot where you can ask questions, and it takes you to our virtual help desk that will answer frequently asked questions, give you resources and articles, or you can send us a question that our team will answer. So I hope you will use that site, and I hope you will help your school and your community try to go solar. And now I'm just going to hand it off to CollectiveSun. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tish. I really appreciate it. And if you're a nonprofit, listening to this webinar, I encourage you to reach out to her organization and review those documents. They have a playbook, and I've gone through some of it. I'm gonna go through more of it, but it's really helpful. And Lindsay, if you go to the next slide. I'd like to tell you a little bit about CollectiveSun. I'm just going to spend just a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, talking about CollectiveSun. Keep it at a high level. This isn't the place really to dive into the details, but just as a summary overview of how we work and how we work with nonprofits across the country. Now, I use the term nonprofit very broadly when we're talking about what we do, and I use it to really describe all tax exempt organizations. So public and private schools, are nonprofits. They don't have a tax appetite, right? They're not paying taxes, and that's true for other nonprofits, communities of faith. The YMCA, for example, HOAs. They don't have a tax appetite. So why do I mention any of that? What their tax situation is that because solar and storage, storage is becoming more and more, feasible for a lot of projects, are incentivized through the government, through the tax code. You get a big tax credit if you do these projects. Now, if you're a municipality, a school, a community of faith, anything like that, that tax credit doesn't help you. You can't really use that. So when we were looking at the pie chart earlier that Tish put together, the research they did showed, 79% of these projects were, or we'll just call it 80%, were third-party owned, and the other part was 20%. I would argue all of that should be third-party owned. And we kind of have a hybrid role. I'll get into that, because if you're a nonprofit, you shouldn't own the system. You really shouldn't own the system on day one, because you're not able to really access any of that tax credit through, whether it's through us or somebody else is a different matter. But if you're thinking about doing solar, one thought you should have is, how can we monetize some of this tax credit? And it's through third-party ownership, and that's what we do. And we've done this, all across the country. We've been doing it for 10 years. We've worked with over 160 nonprofits, 20 states. And the reason why we're not in more states really is a function of whether or not third-party ownership is allowed. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And that was good, Lindsay. Go ahead, please go to the next slide. I don't want to take up too much time here. So who's eligible for something like this? Well, all nonprofits are eligible. We do run into the issue of having to look at your utility and talking with them to see if they allow third-party ownership, and third-party ownership generally boils down to a few different terms: leases, power purchase agreements, which people usually shorten to PPAs, service contracts that we do, and then things like energy services agreements. All of that has a component where somebody else owns the system, and they're monetizing tax credits. With our product, we are contributing 12% or more to the total project cost of the system. Why do we do that? Well, that's the funds that we put in, and then we take ownership of the system. We own it, we operate it, we maintain it. And then at the end of the 6-year ownership transfers back to the host. So Mascoutah, on their project, they saved over about a $250,000 on their project. But we own the system on day one and for the next 6 years, and we handle everything during that time, and then they'll get ownership back, because the tax credit follows who owns the system. So when I mentioned a little earlier, taking a look at that pie chart, and everyone will get access to this webinar, so you'll have the slides too. That pie chart that shows an 80%, third-party ownership and 20%, through loans or direct purchase, all of that should be 100%. Again, whether it's done through CollectiveSun doesn't really matter. But if you're a nonprofit who has access to a loan or to cash reserves, like the case with Mascoutah, you really should consider looking at what we do or someone like us, so that you can indirectly capture some of these tax benefits. And like I said, I'm trying to keep this high level, and we can, please reach out so we can get more into the details. But it is a pretty straightforward process. Lindsay, could you jump to the next slide, please? So as I said, we're sharing the tax credits with nonprofits. that leaves, actually the majority of the funds to come from somewhere else. There are lots of options for that. If you're in an area that does commercial PACE loans, if you want to Google that, and of course we'll provide you more information, and we have some one-pagers and some videos on this. But commercial PACE is a loan that is assessed on your property tax bill, and usually they're 20-year loans or 25-year loans. They can be shorter, but that's a typical term we see. If you're a nonprofit and you're saying, well, we don't pay property tax, yeah, I would agree with that in most cases. But typically, you're still in the property tax rolls, but you have a zero bill. So this loan can still work for you, even if you're a nonprofit. And we use the proceeds from that loan to pay for the 88% that we're mentioning here. And to quickly go through these, and I want to, there's a couple here that are new that I want to just quickly discuss too. But cash reserves, that's an obvious one. Mascoutah was in a good place where they did have cash reserves to pay for that 88%. And they did. And so they saved, this was a good sized project. It was a couple $1 million or so. So our contribution was about $250,000. They just saved $250,000 on their project. Donations, and I see a lot of that with communities of faith. Mission aligned lenders. We work with lenders who want to do these projects, and they have kind of a values alignment with the nonprofit and are interested in lending for solar. So if you haven't identified a lender and you don't have cash reserves and you want to know more about that, we can help. Of course, there are traditional lenders. If you're an executive director at a nonprofit, you've done capital campaigns, you've borrowed money from different lenders. They're all also interested in doing these projects. Crowd lending, I can tell you more about that if anyone's interested, but that's borrowing money from your community. We are, registered with the SEC to do these kinds of public solicitations where we can raise money from the public, your community. So if you want to raise money in the form of a loan, we can help. And the last one is impact investors. We're working with impact investors. We're working with family foundations on the loan side. And in fact, we just got a big commitment to do more of these impact investing loans across the country with very low interest rates. So if you are a nonprofit and want to see if you qualify, this is a good fit for you, we have low interest rate loans for certain nonprofits, and we'd be happy to share more about that. But that's an avenue that we are going down, and we've been lucky enough to raise some money doing that. So if you're interested in low interest loans, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So I'd like to introduce Mascoutah School. This was a great project. We have some beautiful pictures of this. EFS Energy in their area did this. They did a fantastic job. They're a good contractor. We're really happy to work with them. So this is a fantastic project. So it looks like, Craig, you're going to jump in, and if you could tell, I think the main thing here is that nonprofits really like hearing about the experience of other nonprofits. So anything good or even bad that you want to share and just your experience will be helpful to everyone. So I'll jump off and let you run with it.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. I kind of tell you how our journey started, and I'm guessing that if some of you are interested in solar, yours is similar. I saw a presentation at one of our state organization meetings where a school district had put on solar, and we're seeing cost savings there that they could put back into educational programs, take it out of utility costs. So that certainly piques everyone's interest because we all struggle for dollars. So we kind of started investigating a little bit along the same time frame, I believe. We had a couple board members who were environmentally conscious, were looking at solar, started doing some work, putting solar on their homes and their businesses. And then they started wanting us to kind of pursue it a little bit more, even though we kind of started looking a little bit. We hadn't ventured out too far at that point. Wayne, our director of buildings and grounds, since he came on board, has worked really hard on our utility usage, doing night setbacks, commissioning buildings. So we looked for ways within our current structure to save as much on our utility costs as we could. And so it was kind of a mindset that we had, and then grew into, what's our next step, which in this case was what are our options to do something even more energy efficient, such as solar. We started the journey looking at power purchasing agreements, and found that we had a few callers who came once the word got out. We were looking, came to talk to us. And if you're unfamiliar with the power purchasing agreement, it basically is the sense that a third-party vendor comes in, puts on the solar, they own it, you commit to them for 25 years, and you, in a sense, buy energy back from them like you do your regular energy company. The advantage is that because they're doing it with solar, their kilowatt hour charge is less than probably what you're looking at on your current one, which you do see the benefits of that and do see cost savings. We started looking at some of those. We have 5 buildings in the district. 3 of those are within the city limits of Mascoutah, and those are our larger buildings. So when we first started looking at power purchase agreements, we laid out solar on all 5 of our buildings. We talked about our cost savings. We talked about the 20 to 25-year agreement with those vendors, and what our potential cost savings would be there. Kind of took that next step, talking to our city about putting on solar on our buildings, and found out that we hit a large stumbling block at that point. Our city utilities are city-owned. It's a cooperative agreement that's a rural cooperative out in, we're in kind of southern, we're right outside of St. Louis, but it's a big cooperative that serves a lot of southern Illinois, a lot of rural area. So they had basically built a power plant and had bonded to do that and had a commitment over 30 years to pay that back. Well, if Mascoutah schools came off of their power grid, they were going to have a really hard time making their bond payments. And this rural cooperative has a limit on the amount of solars that they would give out. And we could not put solar on any of our buildings and meet any of their requirements. There are some solars available for residentials, but they're very small compared to what we would have done. So we kind of, as you do sometimes, I don't know, at least we do, we fuss with the city a little bit, we argue back and forth. We didn't get very far, but we did have 2 other buildings that were using Ameren Electric, which is a large electric provider in Illinois, Missouri area. And they had incentives for putting on solar and would support anything that we did on the building. So we started to then decide that our option was to put solar on these 2 larger elementary buildings. They're both about 100,000 square feet. And so we started looking at the options. We continued at that point looking at kind of the power purchasing agreement. And then EFS Energy came in and we looked at, they had a power purchase agreement also, but they also had started talking to us about the potential of us owning the grid. We had some board members concerned about that 20, 25-year commitment. What will energy look like? And, as fast as things change, are we committing long-term to something that maybe is not a feasible thing, or it can be greatly improved, in 10 to 15 years. Not sure I bought all of that, but anyway, we heard all of that. And so we started looking at the idea of how would we afford to put in solar on our buildings and own it ourselves. There was much greater savings realized when we did that because, in essence, with the power purchasing agreement, of course, they own it. They're going to pay you back. And, you'll get pays and savings, but they're the owner. They manage it. And they're going to cover their costs, essentially. So we decided we could put it on. I had also done a little research on what funding it meant and ran across some information on Sun Funded and looked at that a little bit. And be perfectly honest, wasn't sure I completely understood what they did. And in fairness to Matt, he might have to jump in here. I'm not sure I still completely understand it, but essentially what it amounted to for us was that through a partnership with Sun Funded, we could reap the benefits of having some incentives that were being offered to taxing entities, even though we didn't qualify for those as a non-taxing entity. So by them owning it, they received those incentives and then shared back half of those with us. And as he said, it was about $250,000. In addition to that, we had some other incentives that came on board. We had a state, Illinois state incentive that's about $350,000 that we had to get our name into the pool. And once it was approved at the state level, then we were assured we could, get that amount of money. And then there's another, what they call a smart inverter rebate, but those kind of probably change from state to state, and you'll have to check on those. But there are incentives out there for putting solar on your buildings. And so we realized they could do that. So when we put all that together, our little over $2 million project ends up, when we're all said and done, probably going to cost us a little under $800,000, of which we believe we have a 7-year payback. Right now in the heat of the summer, and in Southern Illinois, it's hot right now, and we're using a lot of energy. We're seeing our bills for our electric, for air conditioning at these two buildings be almost nothing. So we're saving over $10,000 a month right now. The building that you see here is Wingate Elementary on the bottom, and it is a total electric building. So we even heat with electric. So our savings there with solar is going to be realized over the course of the whole year. At our other building, at Scott Elementary building, it's got gas heat. So the savings in the winter time, and as we store up some of that, may not be as great. Certainly we're using electricity, but not to the degree we're using it now. So we're seeing that we're on track for that 7-year payback. We were in an enviable position of having some money, and the board felt like we should invest it there because the payback was reasonable enough. Here it shows 8.5. We believe it's going to be less than that, closer to that 7-year payback. And it was worth their investment, particularly when you're not getting much in interest anyway on your idle cash. We put it into this project, and now we're putting our savings back into our regular operating expenditures. So it's been a great project for us. Our relationship with Sun Funded was to reap some of the benefit of some of those cash or some of those tax incentives that we would not qualify for. So in essence, we lease it, we paid for it, and then lease it back from them to receive the benefit of that $250,000. And then in 6 years, they turn it over to us. Part of our agreement with our EFS Energy was there is a maintenance agreement on there. So even when it is turned over to us and all of ours, we do have an agreement for replacing panels and stuff as they go out. So I don't know, Wayne. Wayne was more probably hands-on, or at least with the contractor during installation. So if you have information about installation, we did run into one issue at Wingate's a new school. So it was just 4 years old when we put the solar on there. So roofing was not an issue. At Scott Elementary, we thought our roof was in pretty good shape. Knew though that if you're going to put solar on it, it was going to have to last another 20 years because you aren't going to be able to get under the solar panels and put on new roofing. So we ended up having problems with the roof right before we were going to put on the solar, which was timely because we realized it did need to be replaced. So we replaced the roof. We're able to get that done and then have a 25-year warranty on it as we move forward. So the roof and the solar should be all okay for the next 25 years. And so we should see some savings. So I would say the things you need to understand is what your local building codes and requirements are locally, what restrictions you might have with your electric company, your utility owners for putting it on. And then, you know, certainly your board's got to be on board, and then looking for the most cost-effective way to put it on. I think it's worth doing whether you do a power purchase agreement or whether you can afford to do it yourself. You know, we looked for the greatest savings we thought we could get, and that was owning it ourselves. So I'm more than willing to answer any questions, or I don't know, Wayne, did you have anything to add to all of that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I'm available to answer any questions. The install, we actually did the install partially while students were in session. So the noise level wasn't so bad, and construction was fairly quiet. So that went really well.
I guess I would add one thing. If we could put solar on our buildings here in town, we would do it in a minute. We would find a way to do that. We think it's not only environmentally conscious, but it makes sense fiscally. You know, a lot rather put money into teachers and students than into utility costs.
Matt, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask these two from Mascoutah?
Yeah, you know, Craig, you know, we've run into all kinds of issues across the country trying to work in jurisdictions where, you know, maybe this is even new, what we're doing. It's new to them anyway. You know, Los Angeles, we've run into that with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and just some other utilities. So when there are challenges in your particular jurisdiction, you know, of course, it can be a real uphill battle, but, you know, if you do pursue that, and, you know, as things may evolve to maybe where there's an avenue to move forward. And for anybody on the webinar, you know, we support that. So we'll, whatever you need, you know, we can offer support to make the case that, you know, we should be able to do these kinds of projects. On the roof, Craig and Wayne, you mentioned, you know, there's some roof work to be done. Was there an assessment done? I mean, how did was there an assessment done on the roof at some point as part of the process? And maybe that's from Wayne on the facility side.
Yeah, maybe Wayne wants to jump in here. I mean, we had roofs in pretty good shape, we thought. And it just happened, this one started to fail on us. And we realized that, you know, it was starting to run out of warranty, and the right time to address it was now before we put solar on. So we had done some roofing there, but we hadn't covered the whole building. So Wayne, you want to address that any differently?
Yeah. So we had just had an adhesion. The glue started failing. The old roof was 20 years old. We had an extension on a warranty, but we had some glue letting loose, and we had some bubbling taking place. We started investigating that, knowing that we weren't going to be able to do something after solar so easily. So we started investigating and determined that we need to explore this option of just getting this thing replaced and get a new warranty on it before we do solar. And so it was a pretty easy evaluation. But there are plenty of people who offer that kind of service to come out and evaluate a roof and tell you. Doesn't that necessarily have to be your insurance company, but there's other people out there that know what to look for and how to evaluate it properly. So.
And Wayne, on the roof, was it a separate roofer that came in and did that work?
Yeah, we did that completely separate, although I think most solar suppliers, whoever you might be dealing with, have offered an option to roll a roof replacement into the package with the power purchase agreement. They have offered that, said they could do that. They've done it before. It's not a problem. They want to try to make it as easy for a school district to get this project underway, even if you need a new roof. I thought that was an interesting way to try to fund it, but we didn't really have to do it that way. We did it a little bit differently, but that option was available.
You know, the only thing I would add to that is a lot of times, you know, the roof should always be looked at, right? I mean, if it's going on the roof, someone should, you know, be looking at that. And a lot of times contractors, a solar contractor has a preferred roofer that they work with who have done hundreds and, you know, 1,000 roofs. So a lot of times they will bring you some expertise on that. And that's, you know, a conversation that happens a lot and happens with the facilities manager, you know, at the nonprofit. So I'm bringing it up because there was a question on the Q&A about roofs, and yes, an assessment should be made. Do we want to just jump right into some Q&A here? There are some questions that we want to answer live. And I can, you know, bring everybody in on this. Some of them I answered, you know, just directly on the Q&A. And then one came up on, you know, comparing financing options. You know, any nonprofit, they should consider all financing options, and a contractor will present different options. So a lot of it comes up, you know, questions about PPAs, and I think, Craig, this will be for you. So let me just kind of summarize it. You looked at a PPA, but you had an option of you had cash and you could couple it with what we do so you could get some of the tax credit. So basically you weren't funding 100% of the cost, you were funding 88% of the cost. So you could hold on to some of that cash reserves. The other option was to have someone come in and just, in this case, do it zero down and just have a PPA. How do those numbers compare? I mean, how much in this particular case would you have been saving? The question is, how much would you have saved with a PPA?
We did look at that. PPAs were really dependent upon, you have choices with those PPAs. How long you extend it out, how long, you know, they're going to charge you for your energy based on how long they're going to take to pay it off. The longer you stretch it out, the more interest in essence you're going to pay off, and your cost per kilowatt hour is going to change a little bit. What we found was that there was probably a little over $1 million over the next 20 years in savings difference. And that's what swung it our way. Because we were able to invest that, save over $1 million more than if somebody else were to provide us the power, and then we were in control of things. I think certainly the initiatives, whatever rebates and initiatives are available, are big. And for us, the Sun thing, saving another $250,000 meant we received the benefit of that versus the contractor, which they do build that in, I guess, to the savings, whatever they can work out. But we did contrast savings, and we did take those and compared all of those, and it was just a much better deal for us, in our opinion, because we were in that situation.
And maybe Tish, you can jump in on this. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you help with a bit of the financial analysis or comparing different financing options with schools and nonprofits? Is that something that Generation 180 can help with?
So that is one way, that one place where we reach out to partners. So like CollectiveSun in your recent webinar, we also are partnering with Energy Sage. So if you can send us, and we'll pass on to Energy Sage, your electric bills, they will do a technical feasibility assessment for you and lay out some options with you, including running some numbers depending on who your utility is and what state you're in and what other incentives are in play. So Energy Sage is our partner to help schools do that. Yes.
Yeah, that can be really helpful to nonprofits because, you know, this might be the one and only project they do, you know. Maybe they've done it for their house and maybe they have some experience, but like Craig, you mentioned, like you said something, I understand it. I mostly understand it, you know, like I know you get what we're doing here, but how many, you know, prepaid service contracts for solar are you going to do in your life? Probably not a ton. So, thanks for sharing, sharing your experience with everybody. So we know that going in. So we do try to make it as simple as possible. But, reaching out to an organization like Generation 180, who can, they're a nonprofit who wants to help schools, and they're going to help compare all of these things. So there are organizations, and of course, CollectiveSun wants to help too. We serve the nonprofit community. We do have a product, so that we are trying to deploy across the country, and are. So you may think we're a little biased, but when we're not the right solution, we'll let you know. We're generally speaking, we are a very good solution for organizations that have a low to moderate cost of capital, meaning that they can get a good loan to couple with the work that we do on the tax credit side. So if you have and we have sources of loans for that. And of course you have cash reserves. It's a perfect situation. But you also want to compare what we do to others. And these projects boil down to financing in a lot of cases. So we want to help, and we'll explore all avenues for that. And there was another question again about getting city approval and getting approval from the energy provider, that's utility. We can help with that. We don't publish sort of a spreadsheet where what utilities accept, leases and power purchase agreements and service contracts, not yet anyway. That's something we keep internally. So if you are in an area where you're not sure, feel free to reach out to myself or Tish. We can help with that and let you know if it's somewhere where we can work. And if we don't know, a lot of times, there's lots of utilities in the country. We don't know. So we just reach out. So if you're having trouble with it, reach out.
And I'll jump in there, Matt. So one of the resources we do have that's more general in our how-to guide for schools going solar, we also have Introduction to Solar Finance. So if you're very new to this and just want kind of an overview of what are my options, power purchase agreement, direct ownership, energy service contract, etc. It kind of lays out some of those options. On our website, you can also go to our help desk for solar schools, and you can type in your state, and we'll also list what solar incentives or other programs we have found that are available in your state. And this is all targeted to private and public schools. So if you're another kind of nonprofit or municipality, a lot of those will probably apply to you as well. So we do have some general resources, including that map that I showed in my slide of what districts have access, or sorry, what states have access to third-party ownership. That map is also in our Introduction to Solar Finance guide. And that's a good place to start, to see if that is an option in your state. And I would say CollectiveSun has even more detailed information at the utility level. So we have that information at the state level. CollectiveSun has done more research to find out specific utility policies as well.
I would say we didn't know Tish existed, but we might have relied on her a little bit more because it is challenging. You're having vendors come in, wanting to sell you something, selling you on the fact that these are your savings, these are your costs, not that they're giving you wrong numbers. And we, try to check them out, of course, and do all that. And we've been a growing district here, and we have a lot of experience with construction in our particular district and kind of the things you need to do that. But it's always, as you know, challenging. Everybody gives you lots of figures, and as they say, figures, liars, figures don't lie, but liars figure, something along that line. So checking those numbers. So if you have a resource like that, I do encourage you to look at that. It does get a little complicated, and you want to be sure that you're able to get in on all the rebates and incentives that are available to you too. So anyone that can help you in that resource is good. I think somebody asked a question about roof or putting our other options available. One of the pictures of our building, there is quite a bit of solar array on the ground because our newest school, Wingate, is a 2-story building. And we didn't have enough roof span there to do all the power needs there to do. And we did about 95, what we calculated to be about 95% efficiency. So on most days, sunshine and all those kind of good things, we can power 95% of our utility needs there with our solar. But we could not get that close to that on the roof. So we have a big span out there. That happens to be about a 20-acre or better site for that facility. So we were lucky that we did have the ground to do that. There are other options. You can do some solar on some of your porches that hang out over some of the things. So there are different ways to do it. We did find, at least our experience was, that the roof was the least expensive way to go. Putting it on the roof, it is out of sight for the most part, and in most cases, it's relatively secure up there. Nobody's going to bother it too often. We're lucky here; we don't have a lot of vandalism or issues with that, and we did fence around this solar, so it's got a high electric fence. No, it doesn't have electric. We didn't electrify it. It is a nice tall fence that you'd have to work to get to that stuff. So
Thanks, Greg, for that. We still have a few minutes and some more questions are popping up here. I'll answer one, then I have another one for you, Craig. Kind of a hypothetical situation that I can answer. Let's say the school had a separate foundation that wanted to offer a loan or a grant. Could they still work with CollectiveSun? The answer is yes. Where that 88%, that portion of the funds come from, we're agnostic, so to speak, on that. It come from a loan, it come from donations. So yes, there was a separate foundation who wanted to do a loan or a grant, we could have worked with them. And Craig, another question for you. If you could just briefly touch on what the city's biggest concerns were, just to give people a heads up, like what was
for our city, it was financial. They had a 30-year commitment to pay off bonds for their commitment to this energy plan that was built in this cooperative. And so everyone that belonged to this co-op had a commitment to pay off so much of the bonds. We are probably, I'm just roughly guessing that we may be at least as much as a third of the electric in Mascoutah. We have a district that serves about 104 square miles. So we get a lot of population from surrounding communities, some of that are in our school district. But the city of Mascoutah is about 10,000 people. And so as you can imagine, our 3 large schools are their biggest energy consumers. So if we took our electric off the grid, they would have to raise their energy costs significantly to continue to pay off their bonds. And so in our estimation, not only do you have to get their permission, because you sell some of that back or you give some of it back based on that, but we had to have their permission. Plus, we didn't see it benefiting if we were going to save all this money and then the city was going to have to charge back to the same people more for energy costs. That didn't make it very much sense. So while we saved money on our budget, we were going to cost all of our consumers more. Didn't seem to be a wise thing. Not a very good way to work with your community, I guess. So right now we're at a point where we're not putting that out there, and we're on holding pattern. If they end up, I think they're starting to look at some more incentives. So if they do, we might be able to start putting some solar in some places in town.
So the decrease in revenue from, having the solar, they would have to pass through, and that wasn't going to make sense, it sounds like.
It wasn't going to make sense to us. I mean, not if we were going to be good community members.
Got it. Okay. We just have a few more minutes here. So let me you did mention, Craig, that you did get there were some other rebates on your project. That's true for everyone on the call. That's true of a lot of, areas in the country. There may be some rebates that are specific to your area. And when you work with third-party ownership, again, that's what we do. We own the system for the first 6 years. We don't take any of those rebates. They go to the school or to whoever the nonprofit is. And that's typically the case, with other third-party owners. Not always the case, but usually there's an option that, all of the rebates, that are available will still go to you. But I'm glad someone asked, because it's something to explore. And I think Generation 180 and a lot of, in their materials, they talk about those rebates and, who can claim them and who can't. Because sometimes with state rebates, they can go to the host or they can go to the financing party. There are some options there. But one thing's always true. The organization who owns the system gets the tax credits. Tax credits follow ownership. So just keep that in mind. A question about energy storage came up, and it's really just about the feasibility. So we do energy storage. We've done our projects. We're doing a big one here in California, actually. It depends. It depends what your expectations are. So storage, we're going to see more and more of it. It is the future. And in California, depending on how things change here with the net metering rules, storage could become a huge portion of this. Now, if you are the person, looks like they would say in the case of schools, if you're looking to back up your whole school and do like a microgrid islanding, and you could run your school, for days, right? That is prohibitively expensive at this point. So, a lot of times we're talking about what your expectations are. If it's to do some load shifting where you're charging your batteries with solar, and then discharging those batteries when energy is expensive, or you're trying to get those peak demands down, depending on your rate, it can make a lot of sense. In different parts of the country, there are rebates just for storage. So it really has to be explored on a case-by-case basis. So if you're thinking about this, I do encourage you to look at that, and we can help with some of that technical analysis. Question on the tax credits. Hopeful that they'll be extended past 2023, 24. Eventually these tax credits will sunset, and there'll be a holding pattern of 10%. It's up, it depends on the administration. We're hopeful nothing changes, because it gives us a couple more years with a pretty good tax credit. But it really depends on the administration. It's hard to forecast what that will look like, going too far in the future. So just since we have just a few more minutes, just a kind of high level touch on some of the, kind of bring it all together, on just some of the Q&A and those questions. Let me just take one last look. Some others just came in.
I might jump in here and just talk about that net metering a little bit.
Go ahead, Viola. Thank you.
Not sure I'm smart enough to exactly what net metering means for sure, but for us, essentially, when we generate more electric than we need, it goes back into the grid, and they credit us back when we are using less, or when we're producing less, and they're charging us back. Usually it's done over a 12-month period. So let's say over that period that the net is that you generated 95% of your energy, but at different times you put some back in, and they'll give you credit back, and then it all nets out at the end, whether you owe them a little bit more money or they are going to give you a little bit of rebate back. So that's my understanding of net metering. So,
yeah, I mean, ideally what you want, and we see this in lots of parts of the country where we have favorable net metering, where any extra production you're credited at a retail rate. That's what you want. We don't always get that, but still the economics can be compelling. So it's still worth looking at, but Craig, you got it exactly right. Again, any SRECs or utility rebates or state rebates go to the host. With a third-party owner, CollectiveSun, we don't keep those. We can help with PV. And this is a question for Trish. We have Florida Power and Light. They participate with Generation 180. I can answer. Trish, if you can jump in, and Monica, your question about Florida Power and Light. We actually, CollectiveSun can work with Florida Power and Light, and that's a recent. That's kind of recent news. So we'll follow up with you. You should reach out to us, but we can work in FP&L. And Tish, do you want to comment on that? It sounds like you have a client here.
No, that's great. Thank you, Monica, for your question. So just to clarify for folks on the call, that leases are allowed in Florida. The policy we are working on is specifically for third-party power purchase agreements. So it's a slight difference between, with a lease, you're essentially paying for the equipment, typically at a set cost per month. With a power purchase agreement, you pay for the energy produced, often at a rate below what you'd be paying the utilities. So you get to see some additional savings potentially, especially if you have high electric rates in your area, or if, in Florida, if your panels you're collecting a lot of sunshine and they're producing really well, you can see some savings. So there is an option to work in Florida. We're trying to simply expand it and give more options where nonprofits and schools are able to really assess all different options of how they can save money.
Yep, and that's Tisha, that's exactly right. There's a distinction between leases and power purchase agreements. In fact, we were a form of a power purchase agreement. We called it a prepaid PPA, a few years ago. We switched to the service contract, more of a leasing model, which allows us to operate in places like Florida Power and Light. And I think with that, that brings us to the hour. And if anybody else has questions, please reach out. We're going to send the webinar to everyone who attended. So I know Wayne did offer, so if anybody has a question for him, he'd be happy to answer some questions. Craig as well. Certainly, Tish and I would be, of course, we want to answer questions. So please reach out. If anybody has anything else to add, I think we're going to jump off here. All right.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us. It was our pleasure to host you today. As Matt said, we will be following up with the recorded version of this webinar, as well as some awesome content and contact information for our speakers. So thank you again for everybody for joining us, and we will be speaking with you soon. Thank you very much.